The Galactic Council had long dismissed the legends of humanity. The old records spoke of them as a race of explorers, warriors, and inventors who once roamed the stars. But no one had seen a human in over 1,000 years. Their worlds were silent. Their fleets were gone. Some believed they had never existed at all. For the younger species of the galaxy, humanity was nothing more than a fairy tale, a story told to scare young cadets in military training. They laughed at the idea of ancient humans conquering battlefields and reshaping entire civilizations. The Kelvar Dominion, the most powerful empire in the galaxy, certainly didn't believe in ghosts. They had crushed dozens of civilizations and claimed countless worlds for their growing empire. Their fleets dominated the stars. Their warlords ruled through fear and power. And now they had their eyes set on Velara Prime, a resource-rich world belonging to the weak, peaceful Velari people. The invasion had been swift. The Kelvar fleet had arrived in overwhelming numbers, surrounding Velara Prime in a tight blockade. The planet's defenses were shattered within hours. The Velari leadership surrendered, knowing they stood no chance against the Kelvar's might. Kelvar soldiers marched through the capital city, tearing down Velari banners, replacing them with their own. Another world conquered, another species under their rule. But then, the sky changed. At first, it was subtle. The Kelvar officers noticed that the stars above seemed dimmer, as if something massive was blocking the light. A few looked up, frowning, but dismissed it. The battle was over. What did it matter? Then the alarm screamed. Kelvar warships in orbit lost contact. The command center received reports of strange energy signatures, but no one could identify them. A massive shadow spread across the sky. The Kelvar fleet commander, Lord Varric, stood on the balcony of his new palace, watching the sky with a scowl. "What is happening up there?" he barked. His officers scrambled for answers, but their scans were failing. Communications went silent. Systems that had worked minutes ago were now dead. Then a voice rang through their comms, deep, cold, and full of authority. "You have taken what does not belong to you. Leave or be destroyed." The entire command room froze. No one recognized the voice. The translation systems struggled to identify the language, until one officer's face turned pale. "Sir, it's an ancient dialect, a dead language. But the system confirms it. It's human." Silence. Then Velara Prime trembled as something massive moved in the sky. Through the clouds, an impossibly large fleet emerged. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of ships. Their hulls were blackened from age, their engines glowing with a strange, unfamiliar energy. These were not ordinary ships. They were war machines, built for destruction. The legends of humanity had just become real. The Kelvar panicked. Warships scrambled to respond, fighters launched from hangars, and weapons locked onto the unknown fleet. Lord Varric clenched his fists, his voice shaking with controlled rage. "I don't care if they're ghosts or gods. Fire everything." The Kelvar fleet unleashed its full might. Missiles streaked through the sky. Energy cannons roared. Entire formations of Kelvar fighters swarmed toward the enemy. But the humans did not move. Then, without warning, the first human warship fired. A single blast of blue energy cut through the Kelvar fleet like a knife through paper. The explosion was so massive it lit up the entire sky, turning night into day. 5 Kelvar battleships were gone in an instant. Not damaged, not disabled. Erased. Lord Varric's blood turned ice cold. Impossible. The humans had barely fired, and they had already wiped out a significant part of his fleet. His mind raced. He needed a new strategy. Maybe they could negotiate. Maybe. Boom. Another shot. Another wave of destruction. The Kelvar fleet collapsed. Their ships, their technology, everything they had once thought unstoppable, was being torn apart like toys. Lord Varric stared in horror. This was not a fair fight. This was not a battle. This was a massacre. And for the first time in his life, he felt fear. The forgotten legends of humanity had returned, and they were very real. The Kelvar fleet was collapsing. What had started as another easy conquest had turned into a nightmare. Kelvar warships burned in the sky, their wreckage raining down like falling stars. The human fleet had barely moved, yet they had wiped out entire battle formations with only a few shots. Inside the Kelvar command center, chaos erupted. Lord Varric stood at the center of it all, his claws digging into the metal table as he watched the disaster unfold on the holographic display. Ship after ship vanished. Entire battle groups were being erased before they could even retaliate. A trembling officer turned to him, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, we are losing too fast." Varric's glare was sharp enough to cut through steel. "I can see that, fool. What are they using?" "Some new weapon." The officer swallowed hard. We don't know. Our scanners can't even read their energy signatures. Their weapons defy all known physics. Our shields do nothing against their attacks." Varric's claws tightened. It didn't make sense. The Kelvar Dominion was the most advanced empire in the known galaxy. Their fleet had conquered dozens of species. Their technology was superior to all others. But against these humans, they were insects. A sudden boom shook the command center. Emergency sirens blared. Red warning lights flashed across every screen. Varric turned toward the main viewport and felt his stomach drop. The largest human warship was now moving. For the past several minutes, it had remained still, floating ominously at the center of the human fleet. Its sheer size dwarfed anything the Kelvar had ever seen. It wasn't just a battleship. It was a titan, a fortress, a monstrosity of steel and firepower. Now it was coming for them. "All ships, fall back," Varric roared. His fleet scrambled to obey, engines igniting as they tried to retreat from the battlefield. But it was too late. The human flagship charged its main weapon. A deep hum filled the air, growing louder and louder. The atmosphere itself seemed to shudder under the pressure. Then, a single beam of light erupted from the ship's core. It was silent. It was beautiful. And it was death. The beam tore through space, cutting through Kelvar warships like they were made of paper. Entire fleets were annihilated in an instant. One moment, they existed. The next, they were gone. On the ground, the Villari people, who had believed their world was lost, watched in awe. For centuries, they had heard whispers of the ancient race called humanity. Legends of their power, their wars, and their vanishing. Now those legends had returned. The humans had come back, and they were angry. Inside the command center, Lord Varric stood frozen. His empire's strongest fleet had been crushed in minutes. His greatest weapons were useless. He was trapped. A sudden beep echoed through the silence. A new transmission. Varric's claws trembled as he accepted the call. A holographic image flickered to life. A figure in black armor, standing tall with their hands clasped behind their back. The human commander. Their voice was calm, cold, unforgiving. "Kelvar Dominion," the commander said. "Your time is over." Varric's throat went dry. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. The forgotten legends were no longer forgotten. Humanity had returned, and they were unstoppable. Lord Varric's mind spun in disbelief. This was not how the battle was supposed to go. The Kelvar Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries. They had crushed every species that dared resist them. Their fleets had burned entire civilizations to ash. And yet, humanity had just erased them like they were nothing. The holographic image of the human commander remained motionless, their expression unreadable beneath the cold black armor. The silence between them felt heavier than any weapon Varric had ever encountered. He swallowed his fear and forced himself to speak. "Who are you?" The human commander tilted their head slightly. "You know exactly who we are." Varric clenched his jaw. "That's impossible. Humans are a myth, a fairy tale told by weak civilizations. There is no record of your empire, no evidence of your existence. You were forgotten. The commander's voice was cold. Varric flinched. You erased our history, the human continued. You silenced those who spoke of us. You conquered and enslaved the weak. You thought the legends of humanity were nothing but stories. The commander leaned forward slightly. Now we are the story. And you're just the next chapter in our war. A shiver ran down Varric's spine. He had fought many wars. He had faced many enemies. But this was different. Humans weren't fighting for conquest. They weren't fighting for resources. They were fighting for revenge. A warning siren blared inside the Kelvar command center. Varric turned to his officers, who looked at him with panic in their eyes. "What is it?" he demanded. One of the officers, trembling, pointed at the battlefield hologram. They're moving. Varric's heart stopped. The entire human fleet was advancing. Before, they had stayed in formation, barely needing to move to destroy thousands of Kelvar ships. But now they were coming forward. Their weapons glowed with power. Their massive warships darkened the skies of the Velari homeworld. And their flagship, the Titan that had obliterated the first wave, was now at the front. Varric gritted his teeth. They weren't done with him yet. He turned back to the hologram of the human commander, forcing confidence into his voice. "We still have forces across the system. You may have won this battle, but the Dominion is everywhere. You can't possibly." The commander raised a hand. And suddenly, the entire communication network of the Kelvar Dominion collapsed. Varric's screen flickered, showing static. His officers frantically tried to restore their channels. But nothing worked. Every Kelvar fleet, every planetary defense system, every stronghold in the Dominion's vast empire was suddenly silent. The human commander spoke, their voice calm and terrifying. "Your empire is already dead." Varric staggered back, his breath shallow. This wasn't just a military strike. This was total annihilation. The humans hadn't just come to fight. They had come to erase the Kelvar Dominion from existence. For the first time in his life, Lord Varric felt something he had never known before. True fear. Varric stared in horror at the failing communication screens. The Kelvar Dominion, an empire that had ruled for centuries, was crumbling before his eyes. The humans hadn't just defeated his fleet, they had silenced his entire empire. No distress signals, no reinforcements, no backup fleets. Nothing. His officers were panicking. Their voices filled the command center, shouting over one another, scrambling to restore control. "My lord, all long-range channels are offline. Our defense grids on Velari Prime are unresponsive. The fleet at Kelvac's outpost just vanished." Varric's hands clenched into fists. Impossible. The Kelvar Dominion had thousands of warships across the stars. They controlled hundreds of worlds. How could the humans strike everywhere at once? It didn't make sense. Unless... He turned back to the hologram of the human commander. The figure stood calm, as if watching a mere formality unfold. "You knew," Varric said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You planned this." The human nodded. Of course. Varric felt cold rage burning inside him. His empire had fought countless wars. The Kelvar conquered, enslaved, destroyed anything that stood in their way. They had always been the hunters. And yet, humanity had just turned them into prey. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to think. There had to be a way out. A fleet this powerful, it had to have limits. "How many ships do you really have?" he asked, trying to sound confident. "You can't be everywhere. You can't possibly hold the Dominion's worlds forever." The human commander smiled. It wasn't a smile of arrogance. It was a smile of certainty. "We don't need to hold anything." Varric's stomach tightened. What? What do you mean?" The holographic image of the human commander vanished. And in its place, a live feed appeared. It showed Velari Prime, the Kelvar homeworld. But it was not the planet he remembered. The sky was darkened, filled with towering human warships. Their engines hummed with power, casting an eerie glow over the surface. Massive orbital cannons aimed at Kelvar cities, charging with blinding energy. Varric's heart pounded. His people, billions of Kelvar civilians, were trapped below. They had nowhere to run. And then, the worst sound imaginable came through the speakers. A countdown. A deep mechanical voice echoed through every Kelvar channel, speaking in perfect Dominion language. Final judgment will commence in 5 minutes. Varric froze. No, this couldn't be happening. His officers looked at him, their faces pale with horror. My lord, they're going to. I know, Varric roared. His mind raced. This wasn't a war. This wasn't even a battle for territory. This was extermination. The humans weren't here to conquer. They were here to wipe the Kelvar Dominion from history. Final judgment will commence in 4 minutes. Varric's breath shook. His empire was falling apart, and now his homeworld was about to become a graveyard. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to stop this. He turned to his officers, his voice sharp. Contact them. Now. They aren't answering, my lord. Final judgment will commence in 3 minutes. Varric's chest tightened. The humans wanted revenge. That much was clear. But could he still negotiate? Could he beg for mercy? The thought made him sick. The Kelvar Dominion had never begged anyone for anything. They had taken, destroyed, enslaved. But now, the universe had flipped. And for the first time, it was his people who were helpless. Final judgment will commence in 2 minutes. Varric gritted his teeth. He had one last option. The Kelvar Dominion still had hidden fleets, weapons stored in deep space. They could launch an all-out counterattack. It would cost millions of lives. But it was the only chance they had. His hands shook as he reached for the emergency override panel. If he could just. The screen glitched. A voice interrupted the countdown. The human commander had returned. And their voice was colder than death itself. No more games. Varric froze. You don't get to fight back, the human said. You don't get to run. You don't get to negotiate. You erased us from history. Now we erase you. The hologram flickered, and everything went dark. The countdown reached 0. And then, the sky itself burned. The sky over Velari Prime turned white. A moment later, the shockwave hit. The Kelvar homeworld shook as the human fleet unleashed its fury. Massive orbital cannons fired in perfect coordination, striking key military bases, planetary shields, and command centers. Varric's command ship rocked violently, alarms blaring as energy pulses ripped through space. My lord, an officer shouted. The humans have disabled all planetary defenses. Velari Prime is. The ship shuddered again, and the officer was thrown against a console. Varric grabbed the railing, his mind racing. It was happening. The Kelvar Dominion, the greatest empire in the sector, was collapsing. And the humans, they weren't just winning. They were erasing everything. Another blast tore through the skies, and Varric saw entire Kelvar warships vanish in flames. The human fleet moved with terrifying precision, cutting through Kelvar defenses like a blade through soft flesh. There was no mercy. There were no demands. Only destruction. Varric clenched his fists. We have to fight back. An officer turned to him, eyes filled with panic. How, my lord? We can't even lock onto their ships. They're moving too fast. It was true. Human vessels weaved between defenses, dodging counterattacks with impossible speed and accuracy. Every Kelvar ship that tried to fire back was destroyed before its weapons could even charge. Varric refused to accept it. Send everything we have. He roared. If we die, we take as many of them as possible. The officers hesitated. Then, a new voice echoed through the bridge. Cold, mechanical. It was the humans. Kelvar Dominion Command. This is your final warning. Surrender or be erased. Varrock felt his heart pound. Surrender. To humans. The idea was unthinkable. For generations, the Kelvar had ruled with an iron fist. They had crushed weaker species, taken what they wanted, and laughed at the thought of anyone challenging their might. But now, they were the weak ones. And the humans. They were something else entirely. Another officer stumbled forward, desperation in his voice. My lord, we have no choice. Varrock turned, eyes burning with rage. You expect me to bow to these savages? The officer swallowed hard. My lord, if we don't surrender, Velari Prime will be nothing but ash. The screens around them flickered. Live feeds showed cities burning, Kelvar fleets falling, and human warships swarming the skies. They weren't just attacking. They were dismantling the entire empire, piece by piece. Varrock's claws dug into the metal console. If he surrendered, the Kelvar dominion was finished. But if he fought, they would be wiped from existence. The humans weren't bluffing. They had planned this for a long time. And they had waited for the perfect moment to strike. Varrock's vision blurred as rage and fear battled inside him. Then, a sudden explosion rocked the command ship. Sparks rained down, and screens flickered out. My lord, an officer screamed. The humans have breached the ship. Varrock froze. That was impossible. They hadn't even seen enemy boarding craft. Then he heard it. The sound of boots. Marching. Getting closer. A deep, cold dread settled into his bones. The bridge doors slammed open. And for the first time in history, Varrock saw a human soldier in person. He had imagined humans as weak, fragile creatures. But the figure standing before him was something else. Tall, armored, a weapon in his hands that hummed with deadly energy. The human's helmeted gaze locked onto Varrock, and in that moment, he felt something he had never felt before. True fear. Kelvar Dominion, the human spoke, voice cold and final. Varrock couldn't breathe. Varrock stared at the human soldier, his heart pounding like a war drum. Silence filled the bridge. His officers stood frozen, their hands hovering over their weapons, but they all knew the truth. There was no winning this fight. The human's rifle hummed with energy, its blue light casting an eerie glow. Varrock had fought in countless battles. He had faced enemies who begged for mercy, who screamed in fear. But this was different. The human wasn't afraid. He wasn't desperate. He was calm, controlled, like he had already won. More boots echoed down the corridor, and within seconds, a dozen more human soldiers stepped onto the bridge, their weapons raised, their armor gleaming in the dim light. Each one moved with deadly precision. No wasted movements, no hesitation. The Kelvar had underestimated humanity for centuries, and now they were paying the price. Varrock's claws tightened into fists. One of his officers, desperate, foolish, lunged for his weapon. A single shot rang out. The Kelvar officer collapsed, his body hitting the floor with a sickening thud. The humans didn't even flinch. Varrock's blood ran cold. The human soldier, the one who fired, didn't hesitate, didn't celebrate. It was just business. A Kelvar warrior had moved to kill. And so, the humans had removed the threat. Varrock realized, with a sinking feeling, that this is how humanity fought. No cruelty, no mercy, just efficiency. A voice crackled through the ship's damaged comms. This is Admiral Vasquez of the United Terran Fleet. The message boomed, filling every corner of the bridge. Varrock's breath caught in his throat. The leader of the human invasion. You have one chance, Vasquez continued. Surrender, Velari Prime, or we will finish what we started. Varrock's jaw clenched. His entire empire was burning. Kelvar warships fell from the sky, their mighty fleet crushed in a single night. Cities collapsed under orbital bombardment. The invincible dominion, the empire that had ruled for centuries, was crumbling. Because of one species, humans, the myth, the weaklings, the ghosts of legend. They had returned, and now they ruled the battlefield. Varek looked at his officers. Some were still staring at the human soldiers, frozen in fear. Some had lowered their weapons, eyes filled with resignation. They knew. They all knew. The Kelvar had lost. Varek's pride screamed at him to fight, but his survival instincts whispered something else. If he fought, the Kelvar race would be wiped from existence. If he surrendered, maybe some of them would live. His claws scraped against the metal floor. Live as what? Slaves? Broken warriors? What would happen to the Dominion? Would humanity erase their culture the way the Kelvar had erased so many others? He had always believed in Kelvar's superiority, but looking at the humans, at their discipline, at their power, at the way they had dismantled an entire empire in a single night, Varek wasn't sure anymore. He took a slow breath. Then, with one final act of defiance, he dropped his weapon. The metal clattered against the floor, the sound echoing like a funeral bell. His officers hesitated, then one by one, they did the same. The bridge fell into absolute silence. Varek lifted his gaze to the human soldier. His voice was low, heavy. Villari Prime is yours. The human didn't react. No smirk, no gloating, just a single nod. And that's when Varek understood. To humanity, this wasn't about pride. It wasn't about conquering. It was about justice, retribution for every species the Kelvar had crushed. The war was over, but the nightmare had just begun. For now, the Kelvar weren't just facing defeat. They were facing judgment. Varek stood motionless, his claws clenched so tightly that his sharp nails threatened to pierce his own flesh. The bridge of the Kelvar flagship was silent. The sound of weapons clattering to the floor still echoed in his mind, the final symbol of surrender. And the humans, they didn't cheer. They didn't mock. They simply acknowledged victory with an unsettling calmness, as if they had expected this outcome from the beginning. The lead human soldier, the one who had taken the bridge so effortlessly, lowered his rifle slightly, but his stance remained firm, his gaze locked onto Varek, like a predator watching wounded prey. Then the comm systems crackled again. Admiral Vasquez to Kelvar High Command, we accept your surrender. Varek let out a slow, shaking breath. It was over. The mighty Kelvar Dominion, the empire that had ruled over countless worlds, the force that had enslaved species and crushed resistance for centuries, had fallen. The humans had done the impossible. But how? How had a species they once dismissed as a myth, a fairy tale whispered in ancient records, become the force that brought them to their knees? His mind raced back to the beginning of the invasion. The Kelvar fleet had outnumbered the humans. Their technology was superior. Their ground forces were battle-hardened. Yet, in less than a day, the skies of Villari Prime were filled with human warships. Their fleet moved like a storm, overwhelming entire armades in coordinated strikes. Kelvar defenses, once thought to be impenetrable, fell in hours. Cities collapsed under orbital bombardments, their once proud towers crumbling like sand. Kelvar generals, once boasting of easy victory, were either dead or captured. And now, the war had reached its final moment. Varek, the supreme commander of the Kelvar military, was now a prisoner of war. His officers stood frozen, their expressions torn between fear and disbelief. The mighty Kelvar race was defeated. What would happen now? Would humanity wipe them out as vengeance for centuries of Kelvar tyranny? Would they enslave the survivors, force them into servitude like the Kelvar had done to so many others? Varek's mind swirled with questions, with fear, with dread. Then the human soldier in front of him spoke. "Your forces will be disarmed," he said, his voice calm yet unshakable. "All occupied worlds will be freed. Your leaders will be taken into custody." Varek tensed. "And what of our people?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The human was silent for a moment. Then, "We are not like you." Varric felt a chill run down his spine. The human's expression didn't change, but his words carried a weight heavier than any weapon. "We don't kill for sport. We don't enslave the weak. We fight when we must, but we don't destroy civilizations for pleasure." Varric's eyes narrowed. "You will let us live." "That depends on you," the human replied. "Your leaders will stand trial. Your military will be disbanded. Your colonies will be freed. If your people accept these terms, they will be allowed to exist. Exist. Not rule. Not conquer. Not dominate. Just exist." It was a fate worse than death for the Kelvar. But it was the only choice left. Varric felt the weight of history crushing down on him. For centuries, the Kelvar had believed they were unstoppable, that no force in the galaxy could challenge their might. Now, in a single day, that belief had been shattered, because humanity was real, and they were more powerful, more ruthless, and more efficient than anyone had ever imagined. Varric exhaled slowly. "Very well," he said, his voice hollow. The human soldier nodded. Then he lifted his hand to his earpiece. "Admiral Vasquez, the surrender is official." A pause. Then Vasquez's voice echoed through the comms. "Understood. The war is over." But for Varric, the war wasn't truly over. Not yet. Because the Kelvar would never forget this day. The day they fell from power. The day legends became reality. The day humanity returned and changed the galaxy forever.